Okay, in this worksheet, you want to solve each and these are quadratic equations, and you want to solve each quadratic equation by completing the square, and then show all work as presented in class. All right, now notice that for this quadratic equation, the coefficient of x squared is not 1. So when completing the square, you need the coefficient of x squared to be 1. So what we're going to do is we're going to divide, I'm just going to go ahead and rewrite this over, and we're going to divide both sides by 3 to get this coefficient to be 1. And so notice I have 3 terms in the numerator and then 1 term in the denominator. So I can write this expression as 3 single terms. So in other words, I have 3x squared divided by 3, which is just x squared. I have minus 6x divided by 3, which is a negative 2x. And then I have positive 5 divided by 3, which looks like this. And that's going to equal 0 divided by 3, which is 0. Okay, now the next step is to bring the constant to the other side. And I'm going to leave some space when I do that. So I'm going to get x squared minus 2x. I'm leaving some space here, and that's going to equal a negative 5/3. Okay, now the next step is to take the coefficient of x, which is a negative 2, and then take half of that. And when I take half of negative 2, I get negative 1. Now, I take this negative 1 and I square it. And when I square negative 1, a negative 1 times a negative 1 is a positive 1. And I take that number and I add it to both sides. If I'm doing this whole process correctly, what I have here should now be a perfect square trinomial, which means that when I factor this, I'm going to get a binomial times itself, or a binomial squared, and I do. So when I factor this, I'm going to get x minus 1 squared. So x squared minus 2x plus 1 is x minus 1 times x minus 1. Now over here, what I got to do is I gotta write this as one fraction. So I'm going to go off to the side, and I'm going to rewrite this using a common denominator of 3. So my LCD is 3. And you could use your calculator. Just make sure when you write your the expression here, the numerical expression, that it's a fraction, not a decimal. All right, so we're going to write equivalent fractions. Since these denominators are already 3's, my numerator is going to stay the same, so it'll be negative 5. And I'm going to say 1 times 3 is 3, 1 times 3 is 3, so 3 divided by 3 is 1. Now notice that negative 5/3 plus 3 divided by 3 is negative 2/3, and so that goes here, negative 2/3. All right, now the next step, remember at some point you have to use the square root property. So this is where we're going to use the square root property. So when I use the square root property, when I take the square root of both sides, remember we get plus or minus. And so the square and the square root don't do each other, so you get x minus 1 equals plus or minus the square root of a negative 2/3. Now, let's go ahead and talk about the square root of a negative 2/3. So the square root of a negative 2/3 means the same thing as the square root of a negative 2 divided by the square root of 3. And remember, the square root of a negative 2 is I square root of 2 divided by square root of 3, and then we want to rationalize that denominator, so I'm going to multiply both numerator and denominator by the square root of 3. And so this becomes I square root of 6 divided by, and then the square root of 3 times square root of 3 is 3. And so this right here becomes x minus 1 equals plus or minus I square root of 6 divided by 3. And then the next, one more step and you're done, and that's just to add 1 to both sides. And so we get x equal 1 plus or minus I square root of 6 divided by 3. So that will be your solution. Okay, now number 2, again, we need, if I'm going to solve this quadratic equation by completing the square, I need the coefficient of x squared to be 1. So I'm going to divide both sides by 2. Let me go ahead and just rewrite this over. All right, so I get this, and I'm going to divide both sides by 2. What I do to one side, I do to the other. Now notice I have a trinomial divided by a monomial. So I'm going to write this as 3 separate fractions, 3 separate terms. And so 2x squared divided by 2 is x squared, which is what you wanted because you want the coefficient of x squared to be 1. And then that's minus 5 halves x, and then a negative 6 divided by 2 is a negative 3, and that's equal to 0. All right, so the next step is to bring the constant to the other side. So when I do that, I get x squared minus 5 halves x, leave some space, equal 3. All right, now the next step is to take the coefficient of x, which is a negative 5 halves, and then take half of that. So taking half either means to divide by 2 or multiply by half. I'm just go ahead and multiply by half. And then I'm going to get a negative 5 divided by 4. All right, the next step is to take negative 5 divided by 4 and square it. And when I square negative 5 fourths, I get 25 divided by 16, and that's what you add to both sides. You add 25/16 to both sides. Okay, now again, if you're doing this whole process correct, this trinomial should now be a perfect square trinomial, which means that I can factor this as a binomial squared. Now, some students have difficulty with these fractions, how to rewrite this. Just remember, think about this. So when I write this as a binomial squared, this term right here is being multiplied by itself, and it needs to be at 25/16. Well, if you think about it, 5 fourths times 5 fourths is 25/16. So that needs to be a 5 fourths here. And then the sign's negative. So basically, you're going to get x minus 5 fourths squared. All right. And you can always check your work. You can always check if you're having difficulty factoring because of these fractions. You can always go to the side and just multiply this out and make sure that you get this trinomial back. So if I FOIL x times x is x squared, the outer is a negative 5 fourths x, the inner is also a negative 5 fourths x, and the last, a negative 5 fourths times a negative 5 fourths is a positive 25/16. And then all I got to do is combine these like terms. Well, remember, a negative 5 fourths plus a negative 5 fourths is a negative 10 fourths, which reduced is negative 5 halves, and that's the coefficient of x. Okay, so that's what you wanted. All right, and then that's going to equal, now all I have to do now is add those two fractions. So remember, 3 over 1 plus 25/16, the LCD is 16. So I'm going to write two fractions with a denominator of 16. And so 3/16, if I multiply this by 16 and this by 16, that's going to be 48. And then these denominators are the same, so the numerators have to be the same. So that it becomes, what's that, 73/16? And so that's what goes here, 73/16. And then finally, the next step is to take the square root of both sides. And so you get plus or minus on this side. And so I get x minus 5 fourths. X minus 5 fourths is equal to plus or minus the square root of 73. Now go ahead and rewrite this as square root of 16, but remember the square root of 16 is 4, so that's just a 4 right here. And then one more step when you're done, and that's to add 5 fourths to both sides. And so we get our solution to be x equal 5 fourths plus or minus 5 fourths plus or minus the square root of 73 divided by 4. And so that's your solution. Okay, so a lot of work here, lots of different things to consider, but it is really not that difficult. It's just things you got to remember from previous courses. All right, so that's the key to, and this was section 1.5 part 12. 1.5 part 12.